Yo, what's going on, YouTube? And welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy, Kevin Forte. And today, we have some stuff to talk about for the Minnesota Wild. They re-signed Jordan Greenway to an extension. That's the focal point of today's video. But we're going to be taking a look at some rumors for the Minnesota Wild, some potential center trade options. There's a couple of guys that the Minnesota Wild have been linked to, and an interesting name from Score North Sports, an interesting take they had as an Islander perspective. He had some interesting thoughts on a particular Islander from Minnesota that could go to the Wild here at the deadline. So we're going to go over all of that today. So the first thing we're going to get over is the big extension for the Minnesota Wild forward Jordan Greenway. He signed an extension with the Minnesota Wild, a pretty even number and easy for me to do the simple math with. A 3-year, $9 million contract that will be paying him, fittingly enough, $3 million annual average value. That is the annual cap hit for Jordan Greenway. Jordan Greenway was a former first-round pick of the Minnesota Wild, and a guy that the Minnesota Wild have been pretty high on since he was drafted. He had an incredible first season with the Wild, and he's fouled. Oh my God, his profile picture for the Wild. I don't know what he was on, but mad respect, man. So the kid from Canton, New York, Jordan Greenway. Whew. Incredible picture there. He was a second-round pick in the 2015 NHL draft, but I remember him being a very highly sought-after player. He is currently finishing up his entry-level contract with the Minnesota Wild. He's 24 years old, and he's looking to get paid. So he's been with the Minnesota Wild organization since the 2017-18 season, spent a couple seasons at Boston University with the Terriers, and has put together a pretty solid career in the NHL. He spent 5 seasons in the NHL. He spent only 5 games in the American Hockey League so far. He's played in almost 250 games. Probably by the time you've seen the video, it'll be close to that. He's got 160 PIMs. 160 penalty minutes, so he's not afraid to drop the gloves. That's one of the bigger things with Jordan Greenway. But this is a kid, when the Wild drafted him, the expectations, like I said, were pretty high for him. And his first season with the Wild, his first full season, he played 6 games at the end of the 2017-18 season, at the end of his collegiate run with BU. He played in 6 games with the Wild, did not score a goal. It wasn't until the 2018-19 season he got his first NHL goal. He played in 81 of those 82 games that season. And not only did he play that, he also played in 5 games in the American Hockey League, where he put up 6 points in 5 games. But in the NHL, he put up 24 points in 81 games in his rookie year. He had a pretty impressive rookie season. Yet he was a -12, which was one of the topics of discussion that first full season for Greenway. Going into the 2019-2020 season, he did a little bit better in 67 games, so a much smaller sample size. Again, that was the COVID season. He put up 28 points. He actually did pretty well that year. He got a lot of assists, which was the bigger thing with Greenway that year. He picked up 20 assists and 8 goals. And again, his plus-minus, he has not been a plus-minus since that first full season. He's been a plus ever since then, so there is some reason to believe that there's been growth. You look at this prior season, what I call the 2021 season, the 2020-21 season, a vast improvement for his production. In only 56 games, he picked up 32 points, yet he only picked up 6 goals, which is the interesting stat line here. He's not a super big goal scorer, yet he picks up the points. So there is something to be said about that, right? And then you look at this season where, again, the point production looks pretty solid for another pretty good campaign here for Greenway. In 33 games, he has 13 points. But again, he only has 4 goals. So that's kind of the interesting stat line with Greenway. So he's coming off of a contract where, he is off of his entry-level deal. My bad. He would be a restricted free agent this summer, making $2.1 million. So he's actually seeing a little bit of a pay raise this time around. And Jordan Greenway has been kind of a middling player. This season he's actually, again, the problem with Jordan Greenway was he's gotten injured. He got injured earlier this season. He's been kind of in and out of the lineup. But Jordan Greenway has kind of found a role in that third line where the Wild, again, every line for the forwards has been good for the Wild, but that third line in particular has been extremely solid. You have Joel Eriksson-Ek, Brandon Duhaime, and Jordan Greenway. That line has done extraordinarily well for this team. And they seem to be finding a lot of success there. So Jordan Greenway has been playing with some really good players, and you could argue Joel Eriksson-Ek is a top six center, but it seems like that line has been working well. So Jordan Greenway seems to be a really nice fit there. And there's reason to believe that the Minnesota Wild see some real leadership in him. I think as he continues to be a part of this organization, I think they really like what they've seen from him. He'll be 27, 28 at the end of his next contract, which leads him right into unrestricted free agency. I'm sure that was part of the negotiations there. This was going to lead him right into that. Maybe at a lower cap hit now, but he's betting on himself in 3 years from now where he could get that big cash out at 27 years old. He reminds me of Kyle Okposo, who, yes, not the current Kyle Okposo, but in his prime with the Islanders, maybe getting a similar contract where in 27, 28 years old, he can maybe get a 6/6 contract, maybe even more than that, depending on how things play out for Greenway. But I could see a 6/6 in the next couple years for Greenway in his sights at the rate he's at right now. But again, the question about his scoring ability is going to be thrown out there. Now addressing the other thing, and that is the rumors around the Minnesota Wild as General Manager Bill Guerin. We're going to get a better idea of his mentality at this deadline, because is he going to ride the success of the team this year? They remind me a lot of the 2019-2020 New York Islanders. The first season under Barry Trotz, the all-around commitment from the team. Everybody playing in their roles and doing an extraordinarily good job in their spot. Do the Wild want to break up that chemistry and add players, or maybe add a player that may be a potential cancer to the locker room? That's the kind of stuff that Bill Guerin's going to have to figure out. And in his experience as a player and now as a manager, he has seen that from both ends of the spectrum, that could be a good or a bad bet. So I brought up a couple of guys here that could be in the sights for the Minnesota Wild. The first one we're going to talk about is Tomas Hertl of the San Jose Sharks. Now, there's obviously reason to believe that the Sharks will be sellers at this year's deadline. They seem to be in a spot right now that isn't going to lead them to the Stanley Cup playoffs. They sit third last in the Pacific Division right now. They currently sit only 1 point out of a playoff spot from the Calgary Flames, but again, the Flames have 5 games in hand on them. So there's obviously reason to believe that they are not necessarily in that playoff hunt, even though in terms of points-wise they still are. I think in all reality, Doug Wilson and the Sharks will be a seller. And a guy like Tomas Hertl, if things don't get done by the deadline, I don't think the Sharks are in a spot where they're going to sit on him till the end of the season and let him walk for nothing without a playoff run in mind. For the Sharks, I could see him being a long-term fit there. But the price tag is going to be high for Tomas Hertl. I don't think Hertl will go for nothing. And that's where, if you're the Wild with the plethora of prospects and draft picks, Doug Wilson would probably expect a pretty nice offer for Hertl. Probably, unfortunately, it could lead to a first-round pick in 2022, a second-round pick, and maybe even a middling prospect. Now, maybe you get away with just the first and second, or if you don't want to give up the second round pick, it may cost you a guy like a first round pick. And I hate to say it, it may come at the price of a guy like Kalen Addison or Matthew Boldy. And I don't think the Wild want to give up Boldy. I think he's a really good fit there in their top 6 right now as nice winger depth. So it could be Kalen Addison, as the odd man out on the blue line. So that's something to look at. Another guy here, Claude Giroux of the Flyers. He's been the captain of the Flyers for 8 seasons. There's obviously some real genuine fit there. And he's a 34-year-old winger. So as Joel Eriksson Ek continues to develop, maybe that's a not just a rental decision. That could be, maybe they sign him to a 2-year deal till he's 36, 37, and Giroux could eventually become a third-line center for the Flyers. Yet the problem with that is you run the risk where you have to re-sign, some of the guys on your back end. You're going to have to re-sign a guy like Kevin Fiala, Matthew Boldy coming off of his entry-level deal. We're seeing a raise here, what we just talked about for Jordan Greenway. Cam Talbot could be in store for a little bit of a pay raise. Their backup situation. There's a lot of moving pieces here for the Minnesota Wild. So the Claude Giroux front sounds good as a rental, yet, and now that I'm more thinking about it, maybe long-term, that just isn't a feasible fit. But again, the Flyers are going to ask for a king's ransom for Claude Giroux. You're looking at a first and second round pick for sure, and probably a pretty good prospect, which isn't going to be Marco Rossi, but again, Kalen Addison's name may be in that conversation, and I don't know if the Wild necessarily are going to want to do that. Again, for a guy that's going to be there for 20 games and bounce. So that's where the mindset of Bill Guerin, is this more than just a first round exit? If he truly believes the Wild can be more than a first round exit team, it makes sense to give up some depth prospects or some depth draft picks if you're going to keep the prospects. I think Bill Guerin wants to keep those guys, as many of them as possible. He's going to want to keep Rossi. He's going to want to keep Boldy. Probably going to want to keep Greenway, considering they just extended him. So now comes the questions about a guy like Kalen Addison. What is Bill Guerin's thoughts on him? Because he's going to need an extension this summer. Where does he fall in the line of the starting lineup, in the top 6 for the Wild defense? So that is going to be a big question. Now, here's the interesting name that they mentioned on Score North Sports, and they mentioned, Islanders fans are going to freak out on you. I'm not going to necessarily freak out on you, but the problem is, I think the Islanders still have a chance to make the playoffs. I think they're kind of, gasping for air, but you look at the Islanders' top 6 right now, even their top 3 centers right now. Matt Barzal, Brock Nelson, and Jean-Gabriel Pageau. That's pretty good. And the Islanders, yes, it's a down season for the Islanders. I don't see the Islanders giving up a top 6 center right now in order to make that deal work. And Brock Nelson isn't he's been with the Islanders for a long time. He developed in Bridgeport for a long time. I don't see unless you're offering up something really big to Lou, I just don't see the Islanders wanting to make that move. And that's where you're going to give up Boldy or Rossi, or potentially both. I don't see Lou Lamoriello just giving him away. And again, he's from War Road, Minnesota. So the Islanders do have some Minnesota guys. They have Brock Nelson from War Road, and they have Anders Lee, who is from Edina, from the Prairies, which I thought was interesting. So Brock Nelson, who was a 2010 first-round pick, at the end of that first round, 30th overall, but he played at the University of North Dakota. Didn't even play for the Golden Gophers. Oof, a little bit of a traitor there. He played in Bridgeport for 2 seasons, and then he's been with the Islanders since the 2012-13 season, and he's played over 600 games for the Islanders. Now, the thing with Nelson is there is some there's some sustainability with a guy like Nelson, which makes him more attractive than Hurdle or maybe a guy like Giroux, where it's kind of a one-and-done thing. Brock Nelson is signed till 2025, and he's making $6 million per season as a top 6 center, that would definitely be attractive for the Wild. Yet, from Lou Lamoriello's perspective, it's, well, why would I necessarily want to trade him out? And to be honest, for the Islanders, they don't really have a center that can fill that void. Again, that's where if you give up Marco Rossi, fine. But if you're not giving up Marco Rossi, Lou Lamoriello is going to hang up the phone on a guy like Bill Guerin, who he respects very much, but if Marco Rossi's not in that deal or a similar caliber center, it's not going to work for the Islanders. They have to get that type of player. And it may even come at the cost of a guy like Kevin Fiala on top of Marco Rossi. It may be Marco Rossi, a first-round pick, and Kevin Fiala. I think that would probably be the starting price for Nelson. So that's the thing. Is Bill Guerin willing to go all in? And maybe he's willing to go more all in if he gets a guy with more term on a contract. And maybe that's where that makes sense for the Wild. But from the Islanders' perspective, yes, it creates some salary cap help, yet for so long, because Marco Rossi's going to look for an extension in the very near future as his entry-level deal comes in the next 2 years. But it does buy a little time for the Islanders, and maybe that's what they look at. Yet, again, the value of Rossi has fallen a little bit because of his recent medical history. He hasn't played a lot of hockey. He's been in Austria for a while. Hasn't been in North America for all that long. So the appeal to that may be less for the Islanders. And is it worth it if you get a potentially Jean-Gabriel Pageau center in a guy like Marco Rossi and a first-round pick and Kevin Fiala, who is a pretty good top 6 center or top 6 winger, right? But for all those players, is it worth Brock Nelson and the contract duration? That's really where that's going to come up. So I thought those were just a couple of interesting names. The Wild obviously need to add a second-line center. I don't think the Freddie Gaudreau thing is going to be a bandwagon they can go with into the postseason. I think it's pretty clear that the Wild will go in another direction in that front. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. What do you think of the Minnesota Wild in terms of adding another center? And what do you think of the Greenway signing? I think on both fronts, I think there is some legitimacy to the Brock Nelson trade rumors. It's just more, where do the Islanders sit? Because if the Islanders aren't a playoff team and it's clear by March 21st or March 11th, whenever the deadline is, that they aren't a playoff team, I may be more willing to go that route. But if the Islanders are still 4 or 5 points out of the playoffs, as they were potential Stanley Cup champion contenders at the start of the season, I don't see Lou making that big of a move. So let me know what you guys think. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and let's go Wild.